Welcome to Obstacle Running Adventures.
Very much like an afterthought and disorganized. And they just sort of, oh, I guess, yeah, we'll throw a toughest on the end of this event and we'll figure it out. So that was interesting.
Real quick, that's very interesting to hear too, because you would think
Yeah.
that Tough Mudder TMHQ would put on their like A team. There's not very many toughest left in the
Right.
US anymore, right? So you think
Yeah.
that, hey, there's only like a couple. Let's really focus on making sure that we do it right. On the other hand, maybe because they're not doing as many, there's less practice to get it right.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to hear.
Yeah. I mean, now there's only two now. It was this one, and I think there's one in Colorado in like September.
Crazy.
And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember talking to uh, Chris Maltby a while ago too, like talking about how like, oh, there seems to be a sh shift into like Tough Mudder Infinity rather than like toughest. Is that like an insurance
Yeah.
thing, this and that? And he's like, no, no, we're not shifting away. They are. They are. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. And then what about the
Um,
the course itself for like
yeah.
obstacles?
So they had a couple. So I guess they had the typical like grip ones in terms of hanging tough and just the tip. So those were there. They had one that I hadn't seen at least in a long time, which was laying pipe, which is essentially just a long pipe that you shimmy across.
Yep.
Um, they had your typical kiss of mud, mud mile, but they and Mudderhorn, but they didn't have Everest or Funky Monkey. So those were like two like pretty staple Tough Mudder obstacles that I was surprised weren't there, especially for a toughest. Like those are typically like toughest staple obstacles.
Right.
Um, they did have like a electric eel, and it was normal electric eel, but then they covered it and then they filled it with the crybaby gas as well. And so that was an interesting take. I hadn't seen that one before, so that was cool. But it was also like you crawl in there and you can only see about a foot in front of your face. And so you're like crawling, and then you see the dangle like come this close to you, and you're like, oh no, okay. So that was a lot of fun going through some of those. But other than that, it was all kind of standard obstacles. They had the new version of Ladder to Hell. So instead of just the ladder on both sides, it was the rope with like a flat wall to pull yourself over, and the backside was the normal ladder.
Okay. Almost like balls to the wall into.
Yeah, yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
exactly. And then so the course I thought was good from an obstacle standpoint. The one downside, oh, they had a swamp stomp in there that was like actually in a creek, like or in a little like pond thing that was very deep, like much deeper than I thought it was going to be. I'm 6'1" and I was like up to here, like it was
Wow. Yeah.
deep, yeah. Um, and so like a lot of people were having to like full on swim it, which was interesting. And then they had an underwater tunnels, which was just kind of like bob under as you go for a couple times, and then you get out the other side. Uh, but the volunteers at the obstacles were, I think, less experienced than normal.
Yeah.
Um, so there was a couple instances where uh, I was running through at the beginning, and actually on my second lap, because Kiss of Mud opened at 9 p.m. And I was running through, and it was like 8:45, 8:50, and the volunteer was like, "You got to do this obstacle," and I was like, "No, I don't." And they're like, "No, no, you have to. It opens at 9." And I was like, "It's 8:45. Like, what do you mean?" So that was an interesting one. A similar thing happened later on with Sack Up, the like sandbag carry, where there were people doing it. And so I got there and I grabbed a sandbag and we went through. And then the next lap I came through and they're like, oh no, it's not open yet. And I was like, wait, I literally just did it. So like what's happening?
Weird. I feel like it's one thing to like be unclear about what time it opens, but it's another thing to be like, it's open. It's open at 9.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I get you understand that, but it is not 9.
Yeah, exactly.
I also heard some issues in terms of like volunteers with the swamp stomp that you talked about with the swim.
Yep.
There's more attention put on this due to what happened at CrossFit, but I heard that there
Hmm.
weren't volunteers stationed there. And in addition to it too, I heard that I don't know if they ran out of gas or something, but the lights weren't
Yeah.
operational that obstacle, which is extra scary to the point of like it's not just like a mental test, it almost becomes like a safety concern there. So did you have to deal
Yeah.
with that at all? Obviously, you're more on the elite side, but
Yeah, I did. So there definitely wasn't like lifeguards or anything like that, which at least not that I saw. there were volunteers stationed like at the, I'll say the entrance of the obstacle.
Okay.
But they were sitting in lawn chairs as they typically would for something like that.
Right.
That's no fault to them. That's just how they are. They did have a light. At some point, it shut off, ran out of gas, and at some point, those volunteers were gone. I don't know when that shift change was. I've heard it was like 2 a.m. ish, is when it was supposed to happen. But at some point, I ran through and there was nobody there. And then a couple laps later, the lights were off, and that was its own ordeal. Obviously, because I'm taller, I didn't really have a major issue because I could touch for 95% of it, touch the bottom. But yeah, for the people that are shorter than me or were struggling, physically at that point in the race, like that's dangerous. And it's concerning that like Tough Mudder didn't think about that from like a safety scenario because of how deep it was. Like we jumped in a couple times. There was a bunch of like logs and rocks on like the entry point too. So like if you jumped in recklessly, like the leaders tend to do,
Right.
it's like you could mess up an ankle and then you're in neck deep water trying to figure out, how to get out of there.
Yeah.
So
Especially when you're X hours into the race as well, too.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely a little concerning too. Then also I plan to get to this later too, but the numbers weren't the best for this
Yeah.
event.
No.
And so having it just more sparsely populated and stuff too, there's less people to see if something happens too. So it's
Yes,
just kind
for
of like
sure.
we're lucky that nothing happened. It seemed like it was a culmination of a whole bunch of like bad
Yeah.
things there,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. But going to the Crybaby Electric Eel one,
Mhm.